Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Dear student, today I will give you the second lecture of the central nervous system histology. Learning objectives. Number 1. Describe the connective tissue coverings of the spinal cord. Number 2. Describe the structure of the spinal cord. Number 3. Describe the organization and understand the regions of the cerebellum. So today we will study the spinal cord and the cerebellum. The spinal cord. The spinal cord is actually an elongated cylindrical mass of nerve tissue. It's about 45 cm in the adult male and 43 cm in the adult woman. يوزن تقريبا 35 إلى 40 grams. It lies in the upper two-thirds of the vertebral column. It extends from atlas to the upper border of the second lumbar vertebra. So it extends from the atlas to the upper border of the second lumbar vertebra. Now the meninges of the spinal cord, they are three. The first one is the dura mater, the second is arachnoid mater, and the third is pia mater. The pia mater is separated from the arachnoid mater by the subarachnoid space. The dura mater is connected to the periostea of the vertebral canal by denticulate ligaments and epidural space. So the meningeal covering of the spinal cord are spinal dura mater, spinal arachnoid mater, and spinal pia mater. Histology of the spinal cord. The spinal cord is divided into four regions. The first one is cervical, the second is thoracic, third lumbar, fourth sacral, and coccygeal one. Now these totally, they are 31 segments. Each one of these segments, they have dorsal root ganglia. And they have sensory neuron cell bodies. And they have pair of dorsal root and pair of the ventral root. The structure of all region is basically the same. I mean by this, if you take a sections in the cervical region or in the thoracic, lumbar, sacral, coccygeal, more or less, basically they are the same structure with some differences. Now, if we take a transverse section of the spinal cord, what we will see? Generally, as a nerve tissue, as you remember last week when we said it consists of a gray matter and white matter. The gray matter in the spinal cord is located in the central regions, while the white matter is located at the periphery. Now, the central mass of the gray matter has a shape of butterfly or a shape. Number 1. Number 2. If you remember, the gray matter contains cell bodies of neurons and glial cells and some unmyelinated axons. The gray matter projection are horns. Now look here, you can see here, this is one horn, this is another horn, another horn. Now the peripheral white matter, this is the white matter, consists of myelinated and unmyelinated nerve fiber. Myelinated and unmyelinated nerve fiber. The nerve fibers here, they are organized as tracts or column. Now this is the gray matter. It is an S-shaped. It has a projection, and these projection are called horn. It consists of cell body of the neurons, glial cells, and unmyelinated axon. While here, the white matter contains myelinated axon and unmyelinated, organized as tracts or column. Now, the organization of the gray matter. The gray matter is organized into posterior gray horn, which is also called dorsal horn, anterior gray horn, which is called ventral horn, and lateral gray horn. The posterior gray horn is less prominent than the anterior or than the ventral. This is the posterior. It contains cell bodies of the sensory neuron, and they transmit sensory information of pain and temperature to the brain. So they are less prominent than the ventral or anterior, which appear most prominent, and this contains cell bodies of motor neurons, and their axons pass from here. They pass in the anterior root of the spinal nerve and innervate the skeletal muscle. So the ventral or the anterior gray horn is most prominent and contain a neuronal cell body of motor neurons, and their axon pass in the anterior root of the spinal nerve and innervate the skeletal muscle. Now the lateral gray horn, this will be less prominent, and it is present only in the thoracic and upper lumbar region, and it contains a preganglionic sympathetic neuron, and it represents the sympathetic outflow of the spinal cord. In the gray matter is organized into posterior gray horn, which is sensory, ventral gray horn, which is motor, and the lateral gray horn, which contains the preganglionic sympathetic, and it is present on thoracic and upper lumbar region. Complete the structure of the spinal cord. You can see here that if this is a longitudinal section. You can see here this is the ventral median fissure, which looks deep. This is the ventral, while the dorsal median sulcus is shallow. And at the side of this, there are two dorsolateral sulci, and these found on each side of it, and they mark the line of entry of the dorsal nerve roots on each side. So we have the deep ventral median fissure, and we have shallow dorsal median sulcus, and there are two dorsal median sulci on each side. Now the central canal. Now look here, you can see here, this is the central canal. The central canal is present in the central commissure of the gray matter. The central canal is lined by ependymal cell, and it contains cerebrospinal fluid. Now look here for the central canal. This is one of the difference between the segments of the spinal cord. Now the central canal here, which is in the cervical regions, it is more or less near the anterior surface. So the posterior median septum is longer than the anterior median fissure. And gradually, from above downward, we see that the central canal is displaced toward the posterior surface. Here it is displaced more toward the posterior surface. Still in the sacral regions, it lies in the middle, and both the median septum and the ventral fissure become more or less equal. So this is one of the difference. It is the difference in the location of the central canal. It become moving toward the posterior surface as getting downward toward the sacral region. Another difference, if you look here, you can see this is the spinal cord. You can see there is two enlargement, one in the cervical regions and the other is in the lumbar region. Due to the increase in the volume of the gray matter, and in these two areas, because these are corresponding to the sensory and motor innervations of the upper limb and that of the lower limb. So the gray matters in the cervical regions and the gray matter in the lumbar regions, the volume of them is more than that in other areas. This is another difference from the thoracic and from the sacral segment of the spinal cord. Now the white matter organization. Now the white matter of the spinal cord consists of actually ascending tract and descending tract. The ascending is sensory and the descending they are motor. Progressively, more fibers enter and leave the cord, so the volume of white matter increase gradually from the sacral to the cervical region. When you get upward from the sacral to the cervical, the amount of white matter which are present at the periphery of the spinal cord get increased. Now the triangular area of the white matter, which is present between the two dorsal horns, this area is called the dorsal column. This carries sensory fiber of vibration and proprioception and touch, and these fibers will be carried to the medulla, and there will be synapse with the crasellus and the cunated nuclei. This is the white matter. Now we start to speak about the white matter. We say that the white matter is increased when they getting from the sacral to the cervical region, first point. Second, the dorsal column carry sensory fibers, and these fibers carry sensation of vibration, proprioception and touch, and they carry them to the medulla, and where they synapse with the crasellus and the cunated nuclei in the medulla. Now in the cervical and upper half of the thoracic region, each dorsal column is subdivided into fasciculus crasellus medially and fasciculus cunatus laterally. The fasciculus crasellus is responsible to carry fibers from the lower limb, while the fasciculus cunatus is convey the fibers from the upper limb. In the lower half of the thoracic and lumbar region, there is only crasellus, and the cunate fibers will get absent. So another difference, in the lower half of the thoracic and lumbar region, there is only crasellus, but the cunate fascicles will get absent. On the ventrolateral, the white matter on each side is made up of various ascending and descending tracts. The most important one and most notable one, number one, is called the lateral spinothalamic tract. This lateral spinothalamic is responsible for pain and temperature, and the other one is called the anterior spinothalamic. The third one is called anterior spinocerebellar, and the fourth is called the corticospinal tract, which is responsible for the movement of the skeletal muscle. Now, just to take a general revisions, the structure of the spinal cord, you can see here, this is the central canal, this is the gray matter, and this will be the white matter. Now, number 1 represents the posterior horn, while number 2 is the anterior horn. Number 3 is the intermediate gray, and number 4 it is lateral horn. And just to remind you that the lateral horn is present in the thoracic and lumbar region, and it is responsible for sympathetic innervation. Now, this is the posterior column or dorsal column, and this will be the anterior column or anterior funiculus. Now, here there is lateral column. This is the leisure tract, and this will be the anterior medium fissure, which is deep, while this will be the posterior median sulcus or septum. This will be the anterolateral sulcus. This is the posterolateral sulcus, and this is the posterior intermediate sulcus. Now, the second part of our lecture will be about the cerebellum. Now, this is central nervous system. The average adult brain human weight 1.3 to 1.4 kilogram. The brain contains 100 billions of nerve cells, which is the neuron, and trillions of supporting cells, which is called the neuroglial cell. Now, the cerebellum, the word cerebellum comes from the Latin word, which is say little brain. It is the second largest part of the human brain after the cerebrum. The cerebellum function control muscle contraction, so produce coordinated movement and maintain balance and equilibrium. So the cerebellum is important for balance and equilibrium, and control muscle contraction and produce coordinated movement of our body. The cerebellum consists of two hemispheres, and these two hemispheres, they are connected or joined by a narrow median firmus. The cerebellum is made up, again, like any central nervous tissue, will be made up by gray matter and white matter. Now look at here. The gray matter will be outer and it will form cerebellar cortex, while the white matter will be inner and contain 4 pairs of intracerebellar nuclei, which is called the dentate, globus, vestigial, and rustiform. So the cerebellum is made up by gray matter and white matter. The gray matter here is out and form the cerebellar cortex. It is opposite that to the spinal cord. The gray matter is in the center, and it was the H-shaped gray matter in the center of the spinal cord. The white matter here, it is present inside the inner white matter, while white matter is present at the periphery of the section of the spinal cord. Now, the cerebellar cortex. Now look here, you can see the cerebellar cortex is much folded. This is one fold, this is another, and this another. These folded, they are called folia, and they are separated by a transverse fissure, and this is sulci, and this will be fissure. So they are separated, and you can see here, this is one folia, another, and so on. The cerebellar cortex, you can see here, this is the cerebellar cortex, and this is the center which contains the white matter. Now, the cerebellar cortex contains 3 layers. From the beginning, you can see here that the differentiation. This will be the outer, which is the molecular. This will be the Purkinje cell, and this will be the inner, which is granular. So there are 3 layers of the cerebellar cortex. The outer molecular layer. Now look here. This is the outer molecular layer. Here again, this is the outer molecular layer. Just to remind you also that the cerebellum is covered by this layer, which is the pia mater of the meninges. Now, the cerebellar cortex, outer gray matter, which is outer molecular layer, consists of 2 types of a neuron. The first type is called the stellate cell, and the second is called basket cell. Number 1. Number 2 have a supporting cells, which is called the neuroglial cell. Number 3 have dendrite of Purkinje cell. Number 4 have axons of a granular cell. So the outer molecular layer, this is the outer molecular layer. This outer molecular layer contain 2 types of a neuron, stellate cell and basket cells, contain neuroglial cells dendrite of Purkinje cells, axons of the granular cell. Now the second layer is called the Purkinje cell layer. Now again, this is the molecular layer. Below it, this layer, which is a single layer of cell, and these cells lie between the outer molecular and inner layer and consist of a neuron, and these neurons are multipolar and called Purkinje cell neuron. Each cell have a large cell body. They are flask-shaped and rounded nucleus. This is the nucleus of them. So it's a large cell, flask-shaped with rounded nucleus. Now their dendrite pass into the molecular layer. The dendrite will go and pass into the molecular layer and make synapses with the axon of the granular cell. The axon of granular cell extend to the molecular layer, and they will synapse with the dendrite of the Purkinje cell. Now their axons arise from the base of the cell. This is the base of the cell. Their axons arise from the base of the cell and pass through the granular layer and will enter down to the white matter and will terminate in the cerebellar nuclei, the 4 cerebellar nuclei that you mentioned before. So the first layer was the molecular layer, and the second layer is the Purkinje cell layer. It is a single layer of multipolar neuron, and these cells lie between the outer molecular and the inner granular layer, and this cell have dendrite, and their dendrite pass into the molecular layer, while their axons pass deep and through the granular layer and go to the white matter and terminate in the cerebellar nuclei. Now the third layer will be the inner granular layer. Again, this is the molecular layer. This is a single layer of Purkinje, and this will be the inner granular layer. The granular layer is highly cellular layer. That is to say, it contains so many small cells, and these small cells, they are multipolar neuron. They have dense nuclei and scanty cytoplasm, and they call them a granular cell. So this is the granular cell that form the inner granular layer of the cortex of the cerebellum. These granular cells have an axon, and the axon of them pass into the molecular layer, and where it bifurcate at T junctions and make synaptic contact with the dendrite of Purkinje cell. So the axons of the granular cell of the inner granular layer will pass into the molecular layer, and in the molecular layer they make synaptic contact with the dendrite of Purkinje cell, while their dendrite will synapse with mossy fiber input. In the inner granular cell layer, not only there is small multipolar neuron which is called the granular cell, there is also a neuroglial cells which are supporting cell for the multipolar granular cell neuron. Besides these cells, there are 3 other types of small neurons in the cerebellar cortex. Besides the granular layer, granular cell, beside the Purkinje cells, there are other cells, and these cells, they say they are also play a supportive layer cell. Some say that they have some role in the communications. These cells are called the stellate cell, basket cells, and they are scattered in the molecular layer, and the Golgi cells, which are scattered in the granular cell layer. So we have another 3 types of a neuron, and these small neurons, 2 of them, stellate and basket cells, they are present in the molecular layer, while the other Golgi cells are present in the granular layer. So the 3 layers of cerebellum: the first will be the molecular, the second Purkinje cell, and the third granular layer. Now, what is there here? You can see this area. This area is the white matter of the cerebellum. Cerebellar white matter. The cerebellar white matter is made of 3 groups of fiber. The first is called intrinsic fiber. The second is called afferent fibers, and the third is called efferent fibers. Now, the intrinsic fiber connect different parts of cerebellum. Now, look here, just to remind you, this is the cerebellar cortex, consists of molecular layer, Purkinje cell layer, and granular cell layer. And these are the cells that we mentioned: the granular cell, which is present in the granular layer; the Golgi cell, also present in the granular layer; the basket cell, present in the molecular cell layer. Now, The first type of fibers which is present in the white matter is called the intrinsic fibers, and this connect different parts of cerebellum, while the second type of fiber is called afferent fibers, and the afferent fibers include clamping fiber and mossy fibers. Now look here, you can see this is the clamping fibers. The clamping fibers, they are the terminal fiber of olivocerebellar tract, and they ascend upward, and they make synapse with the Purkinje cells. So these are the clamping fiber. The second is called the mossy fibers. This is the mossy fiber. The mossy fibers are the terminal branches of other cerebellar afferent tracts, and they are terminate around the dendrite of the granular cell. This is the granular cell, and these are its dendrite. These mossy fibers, they terminate around the dendrite of the granular cell. Now remaining the third type of fibers, which is called the efferent fibers. The efferent fibers, they are the axons of Purkinje cells. They pass down through the granular cell layer into the white matter, where they synapse with the central nuclei of the cerebellum. Just to show it again here in this picture, so you can see this is the Purkinje cell. This Purkinje cell send these fibers, and this is the only efferent of the cerebellum. This fiber pass downward, it passes through the granular cell layer and passes through the white matters to make synaptic communications with the with the cerebellar nuclei, which is the fourth that we mentioned, dentated nucleus, dentiform, and nuclei which are present in the white matter of cerebellum. Now the last things, all the afferent and afferent fibers, they are passed to and from the brainstem. Parts of the brainstem, I think you know that they are the midbrain, the bones, and medulla oblongata. So they are passed through by superior, middle, and inferior cerebellar peduncle, linking the midbrain, bones, and medulla oblongata respectively. That is to say, the superior, middle, and inferior cerebellar peduncle. So regarding the cerebellum, don't forget that there is cortex and there is medulla. Cortex consists of molecular layer, Purkinje cell layer, and granular cell layer, while the medulla consists, this is the white matter which is present in the center of the cerebellum. And the type of fibers, they are three: intrinsic fiber, afferent fiber, and efferent fibers. Thank you. Have a nice day. Wish you all the best.